course, when you're responding to proposals, they're giving you the spreadsheets and all you're doing is filling them out the best you can. Most of the time they're asking you, what is the pay rate for that person? What are you going to apply for overhead and G&A? Sometimes there'll be a column for fringe and overhead separately. Sometimes it'll be combined. And actually, there's 2 or 3 different ways to calculate overhead, and you almost have to be smart enough to figure out how you get both methods because it seems to vary by agency. But I will tell you, the most important thing in federal contracting, if you're doing services, is how do you manage the people on the payroll? Here's what I mean by that. The people you consider direct employees are the ones that are billable on a federal contract. Think about that. These are the people that when you bill for an hour of their time, it generates revenue coming back to the company, that when you send out the bill and you get paid by the government, that's cash coming into the company. So only the people we call direct or billable are creating income, right? Everybody else just fits into this generic category called overhead or indirect. And I showed you how we break that indirect down into fringe, overhead, and G&A. These are really the fixed costs of running the company. It's the cost of the fact that in order to have an organization with 50 employees, you're probably going to have 40, 42 of those employees will be working on contracts as direct billable employees. But you will also have people that have to be part of the company in order to run the company. The CEO to decide what you want to go after, business developer to, a recruiter, a human resources person, somebody that's doing the accounting, maybe more than one person doing the accounting. And sometimes you'll have a facility security officer. Then you might have somebody that's like a project manager, or a project controller, or somebody that does a lot of the reporting and scheduling on the contracts. So you can see how quickly of 50 employees, how you've got to keep that ratio. Well, every time that you add a new contract, and let's say we add another 10 employees, well, that means the relationship or the ratio between those 8 full-time overhead and G&A employees, now you've got not 42 employees supporting them or generating revenue for them. You've got 42 plus 10. You have 52 people, much more revenue coming in. That revenue allows you to pay for somebody comes down the hall, screaming down the hall to the boss and says, I need some software to be able to manage all these extra employees. We were fine on what we were on before, but now we're in a world of hurt. Can you spend some money? So imagine how many people are running down the hall to the CEO every time that you win a contract, super excited. We won, we won. We can't keep up. So anyway, I just tell people, in my opinion, it's like 1 indirect employee for every 12 direct employees, 10 to 12. You kind of want to keep that ratio going. And as long as you're hiring billable people, you're okay. But every time you lose a contract and you lose 3 or 4 people, if there's not something coming in right behind that to replace those positions, there may need to be some adjustments or something like that in the supporting workforce that you've got, which is why the reason why people invest in software instead of people, because they can still get the job done of doing the billing, doing the human resources activity, doing the payroll, even when they lose some contracts. So this is really the biggest part of it. So what I do is I tell people, I want you to make a list of everybody in the company. Tell me what their pay rate is. And I might have different versions of it, but what I've done in this one is I just said 80 bucks an hour is so much annually, and divided it by 12 was probably what I did, but there's like 800 ways to do this. And then I said, I want you to identify everybody in this company and what their role is in the company. Here's why it's important. Several years ago, I was working with a company in Tennessee. And they came to me and said, we can't win a contract. We can't win a contract. And I said, well, let me look at that. Turns out that they had 20 engineers that were civil engineers that designed highways. Had a lot of liability insurance for those people, because if highway bridge breaks, that's like a really problem. Then they had a bunch of young people that were college students that were cartographers that specialized in the software where you take little tiny pictures of stuff and create terrain maps to be used on GPS systems and on apps and things like that. So they couldn't win. And they said, why can't we win? And I said, it's because you've got all these senior civil engineers with high liability insurance costs, and you're averaging that with a bunch of young people that are cartographers that came with the education and the skills, and they don't have all that liability cost. You're averaging that too. And if you think about it, it's kind of like this. Have you ever gone out to dinner with a group of about 20 people and you think, I don't know these people very well, and nobody's really clear? You think the guy sitting at the head of the table is going to pick up the check at the end. And so what do? You order dessert. At the end, somebody says, let's just divide this by 20 people. You're like, no, that's not fair. I ordered a salad and water. I just want to pay my part of the bill. It's the same thing in anything we do in business. How are we sharing the bill? How are we splitting it up? And what we want to do is make sure, you can see that I've got Ferrari and Bugatti and Bentley and Mercedes are all at 91% direct. I can't put in 100% because I've got to pay some amount for vacation, sick, and holiday. But my goal is to get as many 91%ers on the payroll as I can and to kind of balance it between the support people I've got, because you got to keep that relationship going. It's really, you could ignore all the other costs in the company. And if you keep track of how you use your workforce, your labor, and you keep it above where pretty much the whole workforce as a whole is about 80% billable, you'll make money all day long in government contracting. But when things slide and you don't let people go, or you have a business developer that isn't producing anymore, something like that, those are hard decisions to make, but that's how you stay competitive in federal. The reason I bring this up is because how I budget my people and my time makes difference on how much money I bring in. I call this little chart the indirect rate summary, and I'm going to pull it up in Excel here in a minute. But what I do is, this is like an income statement that's highly summarized, and what it does is says how much am I paying for each of my benefits, and if I change some of these numbers, I can become unprofitable really fast, and I can certainly become not competitive really fast. So let me switch out for a minute. This is the labor estimating model that I just looked at. You can see up here I'm at 75% direct. Here's what I can do to change that. If I were to hire another software engineer, or maybe all these guys came in at 85, you can see how it's mathematically driving those percentages up. It's a very sensitive instrument there, and you want to have a process inside your company where this is part of the way you calculate your indirect rates and do projections. When you're in a growth phase, you're always like, well, when is so-and-so going to start? Oh, you mean Bill? No, John, Bill turned it down, or Bill came to work for 2 days and left. You want to have a dynamic model where you're keeping track of what's coming in, when it's going to happen, when it's on board, and you want to be super conservative about it, because otherwise you'll make decisions on revenue that you thought was going to start but didn't start, and you want to be particularly careful about it toward the end of the year because you don't have enough time to make it up. Let's look at the summary income statement rates. All I'm doing here is saying that if this number went up, because I did add 10 people, let's say it went up to, I'm just going to add $200,000. Okay, when I have $200,000, this number I have it set so it goes up, that I make more revenue, because I knew that I'd have more billable people, so my revenue is going to go up. So I'm still making money, right? But the other thing that happens is when I hired those people, this number needs to go up a little bit, because if I added 200 people and my fringe rate was 30%, it would be the original $300,000 plus 30% of the 200,000, which I think is 60,000. Let's do it a different way. Sometimes I can't rely on my brain. So that went up, and then my percentages showed the same. The reason I wanted to show you this is just to let you know that you need to have some kind of model for budgeting and for tracking your rates to be able to keep track of this and get where you want to go. Because the question people always ask me at the end is, what are my rates going to be by the end of the year? And I have to have a method to show that. While I'm in here, I want to go ahead and show you my wrap rate calculator. If you want to email me after this thing, I'll send you a copy. But this is where I came up with that magic 1.7. Here's this calculation that says client side overhead. In my example, I'm saying that includes fringe benefits. So I'm saying maybe it's 30% for fringe and 2% for support costs for my technical workforce, because there's hardly any if they're working at a government site. Maybe this is 31%. The whole goal of this is to be able to see how this changes and changes your pricing. So I'm going to put it at 32. Down here at the bottom, let's say I'm working on T&M contracts, and I know that for that labor category, because I have an existing contract, that I can bill out that person at $95 an hour. The program manager comes in and says, hey, we just got another position on that contract. The labor category is senior logistician. The billing rate is $95 an hour. How much can I pay the guy? And what you can afford to pay the guy depends on what these percentages are. And so you want to have a way that you know what they think they are. And all you can really do in learning this is kind of get better at it every time. So let's pretend that it's 30% and my G&A is only 12% and my profit is 5%. If that's the case, I could pay the person $62.14 an hour, or if I wanted to multiply it, annualize it, I could pay that person like $130,000. I don't necessarily want to tell the program manager that, because maybe I want to reserve more fees. So these are all questions you want to ask yourself. And maybe you say you can only pay, you can't go over $58 an hour. And some of this even depends on which program manager you're talking to, or what the circumstances are, or if the contract is already profitable and you're making enough, because this could be across the company, could be related to a specific contract. The other really important thing about all of this is your bidding rates today for work that may not even start for 6 months or a year. Your bidding rates today that might have only had 3% escalation for work that's going to be done in 2024. These are big guesses. So you really have to have a way that you're tracking for it. So the other thing about it is I might need to do it the other way. So if I say the employee, hey, I got a person that's going to come on and I only have to pay him 45 bucks an hour, that means we got more profit. That makes me a happy person. So that's kind of how these work. And I'm getting ready to wrap it up. This is the wrap rate. And I just gave you some examples, but what I like to do is show people how this works so they can come up with a way to have something like this on their desktop and learn how to do it more over time, get better at it as you go along. So the other thing I mentioned, we always want to factor in the future. It kills me to see these proposals come out that want you to forecast 10 years worth of rates. You have to be smart about it. What I usually tell people is you can't, as a small business, forecast 8 years out. You just have to use kind of the same rates that you're at right now. I would change the numbers around. So 1 year I'd use 32.4% for fringe, and the next year I'd use 32.2%. So it looks like I thought about it, but I have no idea. And I'm an expert in this. Anyway, you want to be thinking about what's going on, be very conservative about what you do. In tying it all together, you do want to have some kind of spreadsheet that pulls it all together. A lot of people will get something that somebody gave them that they inherited. Doesn't mean it's right for you, but you got to start somewhere. I usually tell people when they're doing it for real numbers, take all the projections out, because you want to get as close as possible to the real answer. You want to adapt this methodology for different purposes, because sometimes it's critical and sometimes it's less critical. And you kind of want to have a way you balance the rates and the growth and the profit on labor, because if you're bidding and never winning, you can't sustain your company. It's more important to win than it is to get profit in, because until you get some projects coming in, you're not going to be profitable. So last poll, the largest component of cost for most services business, do you think it's interest expense, labor, office supplies, or training? Let that one go. Eric?
All right, launching that one right now. Let's see what everyone says here. Let that go a little longer. All right. So 92% said labor, and then the next one was 7% at training.
Yeah, well, as it turns out, most government contractors don't actually invest a lot of money in their people for training, because they try to hire people that already have the training. And here's why. Because if you were to train those people, you'd have to pull them off of direct work, which would make them not being billable, not generating revenue. And most government contractors just won't do it. They may go to the government customer and say, this person really needs this. Will you pay for it? Or can we pay the fee and let them work on, continue to work on the contract? But labor, right answer, that's great. Leveraging your indirect rate knowledge for your proposals and managing indirect cost. Big wins create revenue growth, but you can't always swing for the fences. What I see most successful small business do is just try to let's get 3 people, let's get 6 people, let's get 10 people. Go after consistent wins. It's more about the Moneyball strategy, where he figured out if I can get more hits, I'm more on base, we can make more money. Fringe and overhead follows the employee growth. G&A doesn't really grow on headcount as much as fringe does, because every time you add an employee, you're going to add 30% for benefits and payroll, labor leave, and benefits. When the company is growing, overhead is controllable. That means growth kind of, gets you out of everything. Fast growth gets you out of everything. But if it slows or drops, that's when I've seen companies collapse almost overnight, because everything we do in government contracting tends to be financed by a bank with a line of credit that's tied to your accounts receivable. And so if you quit billing for 10 people, you don't have payroll to pay off those people leaving the payroll. So it's very sensitive, and you've got to find a way to make enough profit so you have cash to get you through those times. But what I believe is your corporate and headquarter expenses really drives your wins, because you've got to be hiring the right people to go after the right kind of work as business developers and bring it in. And you have to be very efficient about how you do it. G&A so often is burning money, because you're having to spend money that you don't know what return it will give you, because you're gambling a little bit when you're going after contracts. And all you can do is say, I'm getting up to bat, I'm getting up to bat. You're spending a lot on business development proposals. There's so many things out there called IDIQs, indefinite quantity, indefinitely delivery, indefinite quantity. And those are ones where you're bidding on a contract with a bunch of other people. One right out there right now is called CIOSP4, which is a lot of the IT work. And there's so many players out there. It's just going to be a big question mark who gets after there. Yeah, it's great to be on a $10 million contract, but if you're like just one of the players, you may never get any work on it. Executive comp is a big issue, not so much that the owner of the company is paying themselves outrageous salary, but when you have 2 or 3 people that are really responsible for having created the company, sometimes there'll be situations where they want to make sure everybody's getting compensated fairly. They see the wins and say, I'm not getting my share, and it really upsets people and causes conflict. Systems to manage complexity and competition. It's really funny when I start talking to people about what is your next step after QuickBooks. It's a $30,000 piece of software and maybe $50,000 to implement it. And they think, are you kidding me? I'm like, I'm underpricing this is anything, because I'm trying to soften the blow. It's a big investment. And what you're doing is doing that instead of